Rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the members of the community and to our special guests. The purpose of this annual organization meeting is to organize the board for the coming year by electing a permanent president and vice president. As you can see from the agenda, we will not take up regular legislative business of the board this evening. May we start with a roll call of board members for attendance.
Mrs. Blackburn.
Here.
Ms. Britton Dozier.
Present.
Dr. Gibbs.
Here.
Ms. Hardy.
Here.
Mr. McClure.
Here.
Dr. Shaw.
Here.
Dr. Zimkowiak is absent. Mrs. Warner.
Here.
And Mr. Winiger.
Here.
Thank you.
The first order of business is to elect a temporary president to the chair. May I have nominations for a temporary president? Mrs. Hardy.
I nominate Libby Blackburn.
Second.
Second. Are there any further nominations? Seeing none, and if there is no objection, I declare the nominations closed. Ms. Weidman, can we have a voice vote?
All in favor of Mrs. Blackburn as temporary president?
Aye.
Any opposed? Mrs. Blackburn.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to open the floor for nominations for the position of president. It will be a one-year term. Ms. Hardy.
Thank you, Mrs. Blackburn. I'd like to nominate Mrs. Warner.
I'll second.
Are there any other nominations? Seeing as how there are not any other nominations, it has been nominated by Ms. Hardy, and although we don't need a second, it was seconded by Dr. Gibbs.
All
Mrs.
in
Weidman, can we
favor
have a
of
vote?
Mrs.
Thank you.
Warner for the role of president?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I will now open the floor for nominations for the office of vice president. Mr. McClure.
I nominate Mr. Winiger.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. Does anyone else have a nomination for vice president?
I nominate Mrs. Hardy.
Thank you, Ms. Britton Dozier. Are there any other nominations for vice president? Seeing none, may I have a motion to close nominations
So moved.
and a second.
Second.
Thank you. May we have a voice vote to close nominations?
All in favor of closing nominations?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nominations are closed.
At this time, Ms. Weidman, will you please take a roll call vote for the office of vice president?
We will start with Ms. Britton Dozier, and you will either state Ms. Hardy or Mr. Winiger.
Ms. Hardy.
Dr. Gibbs.
Ms. Hardy.
Ms. Hardy.
Ms. Hardy.
Mr. McClure.
Mr. Winiger.
Dr. Shaw.
Ms. Hardy.
Mrs. Warner.
Ms. Hardy.
Mr. Winiger.
Mr. Winiger.
Mrs. Blackburn.
Mr. Winiger.
After votes have been tallied, Ms. Hardy becomes vice president with a vote of 5-3.
Thank you, Ms. Weidman. Please note that the list of all legally elected qualified school board members appears on the reorganization agenda. All board members are welcome to offer any necessary corrections. Moving on with the rest of the agenda, we now have an opportunity for comments and I will lead us off here. And I would like to thank my colleagues for their support this evening. It has been an honor to serve in this role for the last year. It's also been a learning experience for me, and I'm grateful for everyone's patience as I took on this role and the times when I inevitably made mistakes. Our team of 10 has worked well together over the past 12 months, and I'm especially grateful for everyone's efforts on creating our strategic and comprehensive plan that culminated in a unanimous vote for a document that will guide our district for the next 5 years. Developing that plan and the associated balanced scorecard was a time-consuming process that required listening with respect to opposing views and compromise. We should all be proud of what we accomplished and how we're ready to actively support its implementation. Everyone at these tables has always been willing to take my call and discuss tough issues with me. From my perspective, I have a better relationship with my fellow board members than I did a year ago, and I'm hopeful that you all feel the same. Additionally, every board member attended at least 3 board leadership meetings over the past year with the help of a fair and flexible scheduling process and a spreadsheet, because I love spreadsheets. Board leadership is committed to open communication and open to suggestions for improvement. Much gratitude to everyone on the board and executive council. I'm looking forward to another year of us working together towards our shared goal of doing what's best for North Allegheny and preparing all students for success in a changing world. Ms. Hardy.
Thank you, Mrs. Warner. I just wanted to say thank you very much to the board for electing me to this position this year. I'll do my very best to serve you to the best of my abilities and incorporate the feedback 7 out of 8 of you provided me in the last 2 weeks about how the last year went with me in this role. Thank you so much.
Okay, moving on to the rest of our agenda. We have the A.W. Beatty Career Center. May I have nominations for 2 representatives to the A.W. Beatty Career Center? Ms. Hardy.
I'd like to nominate Mrs. Warner and Mrs. Blackburn.
May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. May we have a roll call vote on our Beatty representatives?
So I will just ask you each if you are agreeable to those 2 names as the A.W. Beatty representatives. And I will begin this time with Dr. Gibbs.
Yes.
Ms. Hardy.
Yes?
Mr. McClure.
Yes.
Dr. Shaw.
Yes.
Mrs. Warner.
Yes.
Mr. Weniger.
Yes.
Mrs. Blackburn.
Yes.
And Ms. Britton Dozier.
Yes.
Thank you. Approved.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask for nominations for the remaining board members to be alternate representatives to Beatty. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. And may we have a roll call vote for that item as well?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 And any opposed?
You'll record it.
Oh,
You'll record it as a roll call.
I'm sorry.
I said, no,
You'll record it as a roll call.
Thank you.
Excellent. That is all of our voting items this evening. And so now I will make the delegations of board assignments, which are almost completely the same as last year, starting with the curriculum report, Ms. Hardy, finance report, Mr. Weniger, human resources report, Ms. Britton Dozier, technology services report, Dr. Simkoviak, property and supplies report, Mr. McClure, school board report, Mrs. Blackburn, student services report, Dr. Gibbs, our student activities report, Mr. Corona and Ms. Faber, and our superintendent's report, Dr. Highland. Now for our board committees. Citizens Advisory Committee, Dr. Simkoviak will be our primary representative, Ms. Hardy the alternate. Our AIU representative, Dr. Gibbs, and Dr. Shaw as the alternate. North Allegheny Foundation, Dr. Simkoviak, and Mr. McClure as the alternate. And our one change for the legislative report, Dr. Shaw will be the primary representative, and Mrs. Blackburn will be our alternate. And with all those votes and assignments completed, I adjourn this meeting.